50 years ago, information was heavily sought after. At the time, the only major info sources were newspapers and either news from radio or television. But since then, we have been introduced to the internet and smartphones, which have given us increased accessibility to information. However, there are some drawbacks to this new way of learning. I want to inform you about how technology has caused us to trade wisdom for information. We will talk about how possible misinformation can be believed due to lack of thinking, why people think that they do not have to learn anymore, and how increased technology has made people lazy. Now, I use an iPhone every day, and I usually get my information and my entertainment from it, but there's still no denying that the iPhone, among other devices, has caused a lot of Americans to abandon traditional thinking almost completely. Technology may have completely changed our way of life, but it has impacted our willingness to learn. Let's talk about how increased information has made people think that they don't have to learn anymore. Over 20 years ago, the internet had become prominent enough to be in almost every home. But websites such as Google, YouTube, or Wikipedia did not exist yet. So these initial drawbacks meant that people still had to learn their information traditionally. Today, the increased accessibility to information means that people do not have to look as hard for it. Peter Suderman, a writer for the American Scene, once said, "It's no longer terribly efficient to use our brains to store information. Rather than memorizing information, we now store it digitally and just remember what we stored." Now that we've discussed how information accessibility makes people not want to use their brains anymore, let's talk about how it makes people lazy. Another reason we have traded wisdom for information is because there is so much access to the information today that we are becoming increasingly lazy. 20 years ago, even though we now had the internet, finding information still required more independent thinking. The now standard World Wide Web was still in its infancy, which meant that online information was not as reliable back then. People still had to consult an instructional manual or a textbook to figure something out. But today, information has become so accessible that people now use less independent thinking. Sherilyn McCauley, the social media editor for the Next Web, has pointed out that search engines such as Google or Yahoo or Bing have allowed people to easily search for certain instructions rather than think about how to do the task themselves. This increased use of technology for acquiring information and solving problems therefore renders the individual's brain, virtually obsolete. Information has become more portable as well, which means that one can look at the instructions without having to go to a particular place to figure them out. Now that we've talked about how people are becoming lazier with more portable information, let's discuss how possible misinformation can easily fool people. People are trading wisdom for information because the lack of thinking leads them to believe possible misinformation that they find on the internet without questioning it. The increase of information's accessibility also leads to the questionability of some of the information's credibility. Some news sources such as Wikipedia, Fox News, and MSNBC have become notorious for providing information that's either incorrect or biased. The user-generated content on news sites and social networks can also result in the spreading of incorrect or biased information. For example, in October 2008, a post on CNN's iReport site, which by the way consists of news reports submitted by users, incorrectly reported that Steve Jobs, Apple's then CEO and founder, had suffered a major heart attack. But in reality, Jobs had no major heart problems at the time. In fact, he was in great shape until his actual death 3 years later. But still, the fake report nonetheless caused Apple's stock to fall until CNN eventually saw the post and took it down. From learning about this event, I encourage you to do more research about a certain topic because the first thing that you find about that topic may be incorrect. Today, we talked about how we have traded wisdom for information. We have discussed how it makes people less willing to learn, how it makes them lazy, and how it makes them believe possible misinformation without questioning it. The bottom line is that information accessibility increasing isn't necessarily an entirely good thing. It has many benefits, but it also has many drawbacks as far as independent thought is concerned. Thank you all for coming and listening to my speech. Good night.